to the same. That is, this is Johnson writing to Boswell again. Dear Sir, I am going to write upon a question which requires more knowledge of local law and more acquaintance with the general rules of inheritance than I can claim. But I write because you request it. Land is, like any other possession, by natural right wholly in the power of its present owner, and may be sold, given, or bequeathed, absolutely or conditionally, as judgment shall direct, or passions incite. But natural right would avail little without the protection of law, and the primary notion of law is restraint in the exercise of natural right. A man is therefore in society not fully master of what he calls his own, but he still retains all the power which law does not take from him. In the exercise of the right which law either leaves or gives, regard is to be paid to moral obligations. Of the estate which we are now considering, your father still retains such possession, with such power over it, that he can sell it, and do with the money what he will, without any legal impediment. But when he extends his power beyond his own life, by setting the order of succession, the law makes you your consent necessary. Let us suppose that he sells the land to risk the money in some specious adventure, and in that adventure loses the whole. His posterity would be disappointed, but they could not think themselves injured or robbed. If he spent it upon vice or pleasure, his successors could only call him vicious and voluptuous. They could not say that he was injurious or unjust. He that may do more may do less. He that, by selling or squandering, may disinherit a whole family, may certainly disinherit part by a partial settlement. Laws are formed by the manners and exigencies of particular times, and it is but accidental that they last longer than their causes. The limitation of feudal succession to the male arose from the obligation of the tenant to attend his chief in war. As times and opinions are always changing, I know not whether it be not usurpation to prescribe rules to posterity by presuming to judge of what we cannot know. And I know not whether I fully approve either your design or your father's to limit the succession which descended to you unlimited. If we are to leave sartum tectum, the technical term in Roman law for a building in good repair, to posterity, what we have without any merit or of our own received from our ancestors should not choice and free will be kept unviolated? Is land to be treated with more reverence than liberty? If this consideration should restrain your father from disinheriting some of the males, does it leave you the power of disinheriting all the females? Can the possessor of a feudal estate make any will? Can he appoint, out of the inheritance, any portions to his daughters? There seems to be a very shadowy difference between the power of leaving land and of leaving money to be raised from land. Between leaving an estate to females and leaving the male heir, in effect, only their steward. Suppose at one time a law that allowed only males to inherit, and during the continuance of this law, many estates to have descended, passing by the females to remoter heirs. Suppose afterwards a law repealed in correspondence with the change of manners, and women made capable of inheritance. Would not then the tenure of estates be changed? Could the women have no benefit from a law made in their favor? Must they be passed by upon moral principles forever because they were once excluded by a legal prohibition? Or may that which passed only to males by one law pass likewise to females by another? You mention your resolution to maintain the rights of your brothers. Footnote here from Boswell, which terms I applied to all the heirs male. Back to Johnson. I do not see how any of their rights are invaded. As your whole difficulty arises from the act of your ancestor, who diverted the succession from the females, you inquire very properly what were his motives and what was his intention. For you certainly are not bound by his act more than he intended to bind you, nor hold your land on harder or stricter terms than those of which it was granted. Intentions must be gathered from acts. When he left the estate to his nephew by excluding his daughters, was it, or was it not, in his power to have perpetuated the succession to the males? If he could have done it, he seems to have shown, by omitting it, that he did not desire it to be done. And upon your own principles, you will not easily prove your right to destroy that capacity of succession which your ancestors have left. If your ancestor had not the power of making a perpetual settlement, and if therefore we cannot judge distinctly of his intentions, yet his act can only be considered as an example, it makes not an obligation. And, as you observe, he set no example of rigorous adherence to the line of succession. He that overlooked a brother would not wonder that little regard is shown to remote relations. As the rules of succession are, in a great part purely legal, no man can be supposed to bequeath anything but upon legal terms. He can grant no power which the law denies, and if he makes no special and definite limitation, he confers all the powers which the law allows. Your ancestor, for some reason, disinherited his daughters, but it no more follows that he intended his act as a rule for posterity than the disinheriting of his brother. If, therefore, you ask by what rights your father admits daughters to inheritance, ask yourself first by what right you require them to be excluded. It appears upon reflection that your father excludes nobody. He only admits nearer females to inherit before males more remote, and the exclusion is purely consequential. These, dear sir, are my thoughts, methodical and deliberative, but perhaps you may find in them some glimmering of evidence. I cannot, however, but again recommend to you a conference with Lord Hales, whom you know to be both a lawyer and a Christian. Very important. Make my compliments to Mrs. Boswell, though she does not love me. I am, sir, your affectionate servant, February 13, 1773, Sam Johnson. Footnote here, in error, it was actually 1776. I just got the year wrong. Okay. I had followed his recommendations and consulted Lord Hales, who upon this subject had a firm opinion contrary to mine. His lordship obligingly took the trouble to write me a letter, in which he discussed with legal and historical learning the points in which I saw much difficulty, maintaining that, quote, the succession of heirs general was the succession by the laws of Scotland from the throne to the cottage, as far as we can learn it by record. Quote, unquote. Observing that the estate of our family had not been limited to heirs male, and that though an heir male had in one instance been chosen in preference to nearer females, that had been an arbitrary act, which had seemed to be best in the embarrassed state of affairs at the time. And the fact was that upon a fair computation of the value of land and money at the time applied to the state and the burthens upon it, there was nothing given to the heir male but the skeleton of an estate. Quote, the plea of conscience, said his lordship, which you put is a most respectable one, especially when conscience and self are on different sides. But I think that conscience is not well informed, and that self and she ought on this occasion to be on of a side. This letter, which had considerable influence upon my mind, I sent to Dr. Johnson, begging to hear from him again upon this interesting question. And here is Johnson's response. To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear Sir, having not any acquaintance with the laws or customs of Scotland, I endeavoured to consider your question upon general principles, and found nothing of much validity that I could oppose to this position. Quote, he who inherits a fief unlimited by his ancestors inherits the power of limiting it according to his own judgment or opinion. End quote. If this be true, you may join with your father. Further consideration produced another conclusion. He who receives a fief unlimited by his ancestors gives his heirs some reason to complain if he does not transmit it unlimited to posterity. For why should he make the state of others worse than his own without reason? If this be true, though neither you nor your father are about to do what is quite right, but as your father violates, I think, the legal succession least, he seems to be nearer the right than yourself. It cannot but occur that, quote, women have natural and equitable claims as well as men, and these claims are not to be capriciously or lightly superseded or infringed, end quote. When fiefs implied military service, it is easily discerned why females could not inherit them. But that reason is now at an end. As manners make laws, manners likewise repeal them. These are the general conclusions which I have attained. None of them are very favorable to your scheme of entail, nor perhaps to any scheme. My observation that only he who acquires an estate may bequeath it capriciously. Footnote here from Boswell. I had reminded him of his observation mentioned on page 548. That's probably the other part I was talking about where they brought up wills. Anyway, my observation that only he who acquires an estate may bequeath it capriciously, if it contains any conviction, includes this position likewise, that only he who acquires an estate may entail it capriciously. But I think it may be safely presumed that, quote, he who inherits an estate inherits all the powers legally concomitant, end quote, and that, quote, he who gives or leaves unlimited an estate legally limitable must be presumed to give that power of limitation which he omitted to take away, and to commit further contingencies to further prudence, to future prudence, end quote. In these two positions, I believe Lord Hales will advise you to rest. Every other notion of possession seems to me full of difficulties and embarrassed with scruples. If these anxious axioms be allowed, you have arrived now at full liberty without the help of particular circumstances, which, however, have, in your case, great weight. You very rightly observe that he who, passing by his brother, gave the inheritance to his nephew, could limit no more than he gave, and by Lord Hale's estimate of 14 years' purchase, what he gave was no more than you may easily entail according to your own opinion, if that opinion should finally prevail. Wow, try and figure out that sentence. I'm not going to do it right now. Lord Hale's suspicion that entails our encroachments on the dominion of Providence may be extended to all hereditary privileges in all permanent institutions. I do not see why it may not be extended to any provision but for the present hour, since all care about future proceeds upon a supposition that we know at least in some degree what will be future. Of the future we certainly know nothing, but we may form conjectures from the past, and the power of forming conjectures includes, in my opinion, the duty of acting in conformity to that probability which we discover. Providence gives the power of which reason teaches the use. I am, dear sir, your most faithful servant, February 9, 1776, Sam Johnson. P.S. here from Johnson. I hope I shall get some ground now with Mrs. Boswell. Make my compliments to her and to the little people. Don't burn papers. They may be safe enough in your own box. You will wish to see them hereafter. To the same. So another letter from Johnson to Boswell. Dear sir, to the letters which I have written about your great question, I have nothing to add. If your conscience is satisfied, you have now only your prudence to consult. I long for a letter, that I may know how this troublesome and vexatious question is at last decided. Footnote here from Boswell. The entail framed by my father with various judicious clauses was executed by him and me, settling the estate upon the heirs male of his grandfather, which I found had been already done by my grandfather imperfectly, but so as to be defeated only by selling the lands. I was freed by Dr. Johnson from scruples of conscientious obligation, and could therefore gratify my father. But my opinion and partiality for male succession in its full extent remained unshaken. Yet let me not be thought harsh or unkind to daughters, for my notion is that they should be treated with great affection and tenderness, and always participate of the prosperity of the family. Yeah, right, Boswell. I know your secret story, but we won't get into that now. All his affairs and whatnot. Anyway. Where was I? Okay, blah, blah, blah. I hope that it will at last end well. Lord Hale's letter was very friendly and very seasonable, but I think his aversion from entails has something in it like superstition. Providence is not counteracted by any means which Providence puts into our power. The continuance and propagation of families makes a great part of the Jewish law, and is by no means prohibited in the Christian institution, though the necessity of it continues no longer. Hereditary tenures are established in all civilized countries, and are accompanied in most with hereditary authority. Sir William Temple considers our Constitution as defective, that there is not an unalienable estate in land connected with a peerage. And Lord Bacon mentions as a proof that the Turks are barbarians their want of stirps, or family good birth, as he calls them, or hereditary rank. Do not let your mind, when it is freed from the supposed necessity of a rigorous entail, be entangled with contrary objections, and think all entails unlawful, till you have cogent arguments, which I believe you will never find. I am afraid of scruples. I have now sent all Lord Hale's papers. Part I found hidden in a drawer in which I had laid them for security, and I had forgotten them. I do that all the time, Johnson. Part of them are written twice. I've returned both the copies. Part I have read before. Be so kind as to return Lord Hale's my most respectful thanks for his first volume. His accuracy strikes me with wonder. His narrative is far superior to that of Henault, as I have formerly mentioned. I am afraid that the trouble which my irregularity and delay has cost him is greater, far greater, than any good that I can do him will ever recompense. But if I have any more copy, I will try to do better. Pray let me know if Mrs. Boswell is friends with me, and pay my respects to Veronica and Euphemia and Alexander. I am, sir, your most humble servant, February 15th, 1776, Sam Johnson. Let's see. I think I'm gonna have to end right now. It's a little dry today. Very dry legal matters from the 1700s, you know. Anyway, until next time, bye from Boswell.